Welcome back to The Rational Brit. Today we're tackling the UK energy crisis, but not in the way you've heard it covered 1,000 times before. We're going beyond the headlines about price spikes and bill shock to ask the fundamental question: what actually comes next for Britain's energy system? Because here's the reality. The energy crisis isn't just about the past few years of volatile prices. It's about decades of underinvestment, policy confusion, and strategic missteps that have left Britain dangerously exposed. But it's also about genuine opportunities for transformation that could secure our energy future for generations. Let's examine what's really happening, and more importantly, what needs to happen next. First, let's establish what we're actually dealing with. The UK energy crisis has three fundamental dimensions that go far beyond recent price volatility. The first dimension is infrastructure decay and underinvestment. Britain's energy infrastructure is aging badly. Much of our electricity grid was built in the 1950s and 60s. We've closed coal plants without adequately replacing baseload capacity. Our gas storage capacity was reduced to virtually nothing when the Rough storage facility closed in 2017. We now have less than 2% of Europe's gas storage capacity, despite being a major consumer. This leaves us acutely vulnerable to price shocks and supply disruptions. The second dimension is energy security and import dependence. Britain once had energy independence through North Sea oil and gas. Those days are gone. North Sea production has declined by over 75% since its peak. We now import approximately half our gas and substantial amounts of electricity through interconnectors. This isn't inherently problematic, but it creates exposure to geopolitical events completely outside our control. When Russia weaponized gas supplies to Europe, Britain felt the impact, despite not importing Russian gas directly, because we compete in the same European market. The third dimension is the transition challenge. Britain has committed to net zero by 2050 and to decarbonizing the electricity grid by 2035. These are ambitious targets that require fundamentally transforming how we generate, distribute, and consume energy. Renewables now provide over 40% of our electricity, which is impressive progress. But renewables are intermittent. Wind doesn't always blow, sun doesn't always shine. We haven't solved the storage problem at scale. And meanwhile, we're planning to dramatically increase electricity demand by electrifying transport and heating. We're trying to do more with a system that's already struggling. These three dimensions interact and compound each other. Aging infrastructure makes the transition harder. Import dependence creates vulnerability. The transition timeline creates urgency that tests infrastructure limits. It's a genuinely complex problem, and simplistic solutions won't work. Let me give you some concrete numbers. Average household energy bills peaked at over £4,000 annually under the price cap during the worst of the crisis. Even with government support, millions of households faced energy poverty. Businesses saw costs increase fivefold in some cases. Energy-intensive industries like steel, ceramics, and chemicals faced existential threats. Some closed permanently. But here's what the headlines often miss. High prices are a symptom, not the disease. The disease is a fragile, transitioning energy system that lacks resilience. Prices will stabilize eventually, but unless we address the underlying structural problems, we'll face crisis after crisis. So, what are the realistic solutions? Let's examine 5 key pathways that could actually work. First, massive renewable expansion paired with storage. Britain has extraordinary natural advantages for renewable energy. We have some of the best offshore wind resources in the world. Solar capacity is growing despite our famously cloudy weather. The government has committed to expanding offshore wind to 50 gigawatts by 2030, but renewables without storage create problems. We need battery storage for short-term balancing and other technologies like hydrogen or pumped hydro for longer-term storage. The technology exists. The challenge is deploying it at scale quickly enough. Recent auction rounds have struggled to attract investment due to cost concerns, which needs addressing urgently. Second, nuclear renaissance. Nuclear is controversial, but provides carbon-free baseload power that renewables can't match. Britain currently gets about 15% of electricity from nuclear, but most existing plants are reaching end of life. Hinkley Point C is under construction, but massively over budget and behind schedule. The government has committed to new plants, including Sizewell C, and there's growing interest in small modular reactors that could be built more quickly and cheaply. The challenge is nuclear's enormous upfront costs and construction timelines. We need plants operational in the 2030s, which means making decisions now. There's also the perpetual challenge of waste disposal and public acceptance. Third, grid modernization and smart infrastructure. Our Victorian-era grid wasn't designed for distributed generation from thousands of wind turbines and solar panels, or for the massive demand increases coming from electric vehicles and heat pumps. We need smart grids that can balance supply and demand in real time, manage two-way power flows, and integrate storage effectively. This requires billions in investment and sophisticated digital infrastructure. The national grid has published plans for this, but delivery at pace is critical. Fourth, energy efficiency and demand management. The cheapest energy is the energy we don't use. Britain has some of the least energy-efficient housing stock in Europe. Proper insulation, heat pumps instead of gas boilers, and energy-efficient appliances could dramatically reduce demand. The government's various schemes for home retrofitting have been inconsistent and underfunded. We need a long-term, properly funded program. Similarly, smart demand management, where prices incentivize consumption when supply is abundant, could reduce the need for expensive peak capacity. Fifth, strategic gas and storage capacity. While we transition to net zero, gas will remain important for balancing and backup. We need strategic gas storage capacity restored. This isn't about prolonging fossil fuel dependence, it's about managing the transition pragmatically. Having domestic storage reduces exposure to global price volatility and provides energy security during the transition period. Some argue we should also maintain or even expand North Sea production to reduce import dependence during the transition period, though this is controversial from a climate perspective. These solutions aren't mutually exclusive. We need all of them working together. The question is how quickly we can deploy them and whether we have the political will to make the necessary investments. So, what does the next decade actually look like? Let's be realistic about timelines and challenges. In the near term, prices will likely remain volatile, but gradually stabilize as European gas markets adjust to post-Russian supply. The government's energy price guarantee has provided temporary relief, but can't continue indefinitely. We'll see continued pressure on household budgets and businesses, though hopefully less extreme than peak crisis levels. By 2030, we should see substantial offshore wind expansion if projects stay on track. Battery storage will accelerate. Early small modular reactors might be under construction. Electric vehicle adoption will increase significantly, placing new demands on the grid. The transition will be visible and tangible. The 2030s will be the critical decade. This is when we'll discover if our infrastructure investments were sufficient, if our storage solutions work at scale, and if we can actually meet the 2035 grid decarbonization target. There will inevitably be setbacks and surprises. Technology might progress faster than expected in some areas, slower in others. Political priorities might shift. Several things need to happen for success. We need consistent long-term policy that survives changes in government.
Energy infrastructure projects take decades. They can't be subject to political whim. We need substantial investment, both public and private. The sums required are enormous, likely hundreds of billions over the next 2 decades. We need planning reform to accelerate project approvals without sacrificing environmental protections. We need public buy-in for necessary changes, from accepting wind farms and pylons to retrofitting homes. We also need to be honest about trade-offs. Energy security, affordability, and decarbonization are all important, but they sometimes conflict. More domestic generation improves security, but might increase costs short-term. Faster decarbonization might compromise reliability if storage isn't ready. These are real tensions that require difficult choices.
The most likely scenario is messy progress. We'll achieve substantial renewable expansion, but miss some targets. Nuclear will take longer and cost more than projected. Storage will improve, but not as quickly as needed. We'll muddle through with a mix of solutions, some temporary fixes and ongoing challenges. That's not pessimism, it's realism. Complex system transformations are never smooth. So, what comes next for UK energy? The answer is a long, difficult, but ultimately achievable transition. The energy crisis revealed the fragility of Britain's energy system, but it also created political will for change. We now have commitments to substantial investment in renewables, nuclear, and infrastructure. Whether these commitments translate to reality depends on sustained political focus and public support. Britain has genuine advantages: excellent renewable resources, strong engineering expertise, access to capital, and democratic institutions that can plan long-term if they choose to. We're not starting from scratch, we're building on substantial progress already made. But we face genuine challenges: aging infrastructure, competing priorities for public investment, planning barriers, and the sheer complexity of transforming an entire energy system while maintaining reliability and affordability. The energy crisis won't be solved by any single solution or quick fix. It requires sustained effort across multiple fronts over 2 decades. That's not a satisfying soundbite, but it's the truth. What comes next is up to us. The choices we make now about investment, policy, and priorities will determine whether Britain has secure, affordable, clean energy in 2040, or whether we're still lurching from crisis to crisis. Thank you for watching The Rational Brit. If you found this analysis valuable, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Until next time, stay rational.